Before we begin, please note, this story is generated and narrated by AI. If you notice any glitches in the voice, feel free to leave a comment. Your feedback helps improve future videos. Have you ever felt watched by something you couldn't see deep in the woods? Let us know in the comments. I never knew my great-uncle Sylvan. In fact, I hadn't even heard his name until the letter arrived. It was thick parchment, the kind that carries bad news even before it's opened, postmarked in Cluj-Napoca, and written in a style that seemed untouched by the last 50 years. The letter informed me that Sylvan Pawn, a relative so distant that even my mother wasn't sure where he fit in the family tree, had passed away 3 months prior, and had named me, the sole heir to his property. It wasn't a fortune, no gold, no bank accounts in Zurich, no dusty heirlooms behind paintings, just a cabin, a modest home on the edge of a forest near a village called Stankery. Population, unknown. Even Google Maps didn't bother with a photo. But I was tired, burned out. My job had become noise. My friends were drifting. And the city had started to feel like a television left on in another room. So I packed a duffel bag, booked a one-way flight, and left. The train from Cluj was old, Soviet-built steel that rattled like bones in a tin can. By the time I reached the final stop, dusk had already soaked the hills in that particular shade of gray that seems intentional. A man with a mustache like barbed wire waited beside an aging Dacia 1300. He said nothing, just nodded once, and gestured for my bag. We drove in silence for almost an hour, past grazing sheep, rotted wooden fences, abandoned orchards. Eventually, the road gave way, to gravel, then to dirt, and then to something that wasn't a road at all. The village was barely more than 6 homes and a squat stone church with a boarded-up bell tower. No gas station, no signs, not even a name on the bus stop. But people were there, watching, old women in shawls, sitting motionless on porches, a boy with one eye clouded white, a priest sweeping the same patch of stone over and over. Even though the wind had blown all the leaves away, no one spoke. The driver finally stopped in front of a narrow path flanked by 2 crooked birch trees. He pointed once toward the woods and then made a small gesture, a circle over his heart. I didn't ask questions, not yet. I should have. The cabin was older than I'd expected and colder. Its roof sagged slightly, as if exhausted from holding itself up for so many winters. The walls were lined with shelves full of yellowed books, animal bones, and carved wooden figures whose eyes never quite faced forward. There was no electricity, just a rusted stove, a kerosene lamp, and a fireplace choked with ash. I spent the first night unpacking, or rather, exploring. Each object seemed chosen for a reason. A dried wreath of rosemary and thistle above the door, a copper key hanging from a nail on the bed frame, and, beneath the floorboards in the bedroom closet, a bundle of Polaroids tied with twine. They were all photos of trees, the same patch of forest from slightly different angles, taken at different times of year. But in each one, the same 3 birch trees appeared in the foreground. They stood in a perfect row, each taller than the last, their trunks too pale, their bark scarred with symbols I couldn't place, and in the final photo, a 4th shape had appeared behind them, a shadow. The village had one tavern, if you could call it that, just a cellar beneath one of the homes, lit by oil lamps and smelling of damp bread and salt pork. I met him there, the only man who spoke English, or at least enough to get his point across. He told me his name was Gavril, And he remembered Sylvan. He stayed out there too long, he said, sipping from a chipped glass, wrote things down, drew circles, wouldn't talk to nobody. I asked him what people thought of Sylvan. He shook his head. He watched the woods too much, and they watched back. Later that night, I stood on the cabin's porch. The forest lay beyond the clearing, black and breathing, as if each branch inhaled the cold mountain air, and I realized something. All 3 birch trees from the photo, they were real, and they stood less than 30 meters from my front door. I didn't sleep well. The wind pushed against the wooden shutters like someone trying the windows. The stove made tapping sounds, slow at first, then quicker, then gone, and just before I drifted off, I thought I heard footsteps on the porch, but when I opened the door, nothing, just silence, and 3 white birch trees, standing, just as they had in the photograph. In the morning, I checked the porch for prints. Nothing. I went for a short walk near the tree line, staying close to the cabin. Still, I couldn't help but feel the trees were different now, like their trunks had shifted slightly overnight, just enough to notice. Inside, I decided to explore more of the cabin. Behind the bookshelf, I found something else, a panel that creaked open with a little force, revealing a hidden cubby. Inside it, a diary. The handwriting was neat at first, measured and analytical. March 3rd, arrived today. The land is quiet. I sense a rhythm in the wind here, like it hums with memory, but as the pages went on, the script became jittery, words trailing off mid-sentence. April 12th, I saw myself from behind. I was standing by the trees, but also watching from the window. Something is wrong with the mirror canopy, and later still, May 9th, the echo child knocked again. I did not open the door. I will not. That night, I heard a knock at the door, 3 times, slow, measured. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then, it came again, but this time, from the back of the house. I didn't open the door. I couldn't, not after reading what Sylvan had written. Instead, I stayed in the chair near the fireplace, holding the old copper key from the bed frame, turning it over in my hand like a talisman, as if its weight could anchor me. The knock stopped after the second round, but the silence that followed was worse. It felt occupied, like something stood just outside my line of vision, just behind the edges of thought. I told myself I'd imagined it, that it was wind, the house settling, maybe even some local kids playing tricks, but the next morning, I found a small pile of stones on the porch, arranged in a circle, and in the center, a single birch leaf, folded into the shape of a mouth. I visited Gavril again. The tavern was nearly empty this time, only an old woman in the corner, murmuring into a glass of plum brandy. When I told him about the knocks and the stone circle, his face turned pale, and then hard. You listened, didn't you? He didn't say it like a question. I asked him what the hell was going on. What did Sylvan get himself into? What was wrong with the forest? Gavril didn't speak at first. He just reached into the inner pocket of his coat and slid a folded page toward me. It was brittle, like it had been torn from a much older book. On it was a hand-drawn diagram of a tree, but not a normal one. Its trunk had eyes, too many eyes, some open, some stitched shut, and its roots reached not into soil, but into mouths, rows. In rows of open human mouths, at the base was a single sentence, written in Latin, speculum vivid in ligno. Gavril translated it. The mirror lives in the wood. And then he looked at me, with something that wasn't pity, and wasn't anger, just inevitability. "You hear it calling yet?" he asked. I didn't answer because I had. It started as a whisper at the edge of my dreams, a rustling that spoke with intention, like breath between words. But it wasn't in English or Romanian. It was older, a cadence that crawled into your skull and waited. The next day, I took the copper key and walked deeper into the forest, not far, just past the 3 birch trees. I needed to prove to myself that this was just paranoia, a trick of grief or isolation. The air changed almost immediately, not colder, but denser, like sound itself moved slower between the trees. Birds were absent, no wind, no insects, just the crunch of my boots against soil that was far too dry. I found the clearing an hour later, and I say found because it felt like it was placed there, a perfect circle, free of leaves, surrounded by birches whose bark looked peeled, like skin turned inside out. In the center stood a single stone pillar, no taller than my chest. On it, carved symbols, the same ones I'd seen on the trees. I took out my phone to take a photo, but the screen was black, battery full, yet nothing worked. That's when I heard the voice. It was my mother's voice, but not like I remembered it. It was flat, drained of emotion, like someone reading a transcript of her words. "Come home. Now. Please. Just come home." I turned around. "No one. Come home. Now. Please. Just come home." The voice repeated itself, exact same tone, same cadence, again and again, and with it came the smell, a sharp, coppery tang, like old blood soaked into wood. I ran, not a dignified walk, not a cautious retreat. I ran like a man trying to escape a burning house. The forest did not like that. The path behind me twisted, literally bent in ways I can't describe. At one point, I found myself back at the clearing, even though I'd been running in the opposite direction. That's when I saw it. In the tree line, just beyond reach, a shape, human in form, but too tall, its arms too long, its head tilted in a way that suggested listening, not looking, and where its face should have been was mine. Not exactly mine, a hollowed, imprecise version of me. Eyes too wide, mouth too narrow, as if something had only seen me through a smeared mirror, and then it spoke. "You shouldn't have opened the floor." Its voice matched mine, but half a second behind, as if it were sinking, then silence. I don't remember how I got back to the cabin. All I know is that when I shut the door, the 3 birch trees were closer, not dramatically so, just enough to be noticed. I collapsed into sleep and dreamed of the pillar, the mouths and the roots, and a single phrase, not spoken aloud, but etched into thought itself: reflection is permission. The next morning, there was a knock on the window, not the door, the window, and when I looked outside, there was no one there, but on the glass, written in condensation, 3 letters: run. I didn't leave the cabin that day. I didn't move for hours. I just stared at the fog outside. Thick, almost creamy, swirling in ways that defied wind. The word run had vanished from the window, but the memory remained. I tried calling someone, anyone, but the phone lines were dead. The reception tower wasn't even on the map. No signal, no bars, just an empty icon blinking, like a heartbeat slowly winding down. Around dusk, I heard my name, not from outside, but from the fireplace. It was faint, almost mistaken for the crackle of wood, but then it repeated, clearer this time, a voice like my uncle's, but slower, with a weight behind it that didn't belong to any living man. Come down, we kept it for you. There was no basement in the cabin, at least, not one I'd seen, but the floor near the hearth felt different. Older wood, darker, like something sealed over. I searched the cabin with new eyes, running my fingers under every shelf, every board, until I found the second keyhole. The copper key fit. It turned with effort, grinding metal on metal, and with a groan like something exhaling beneath my feet, the trapdoor opened. A steep set of stairs led downward, too steep for a proper basement, and they descended longer than they should have, much longer. The air smelled of damp stone and burnt herbs, walls lined with tree bark, not just placed, but grown into the structure itself. Roots veined the ceiling, and in the center of the space, a chair. It was made entirely of bones, not human. I told myself, but the size, the shape, the way some were still wrapped in dried sinew, suggested otherwise. On a nearby shelf, I found a small mirror, but when I looked into it, I didn't see myself. I saw the clearing, the stone pillar, and standing beside it, that thing in my shape. It was smiling now. Suddenly, a voice spoke from the mirror, not mine, not my uncle's, but the forest, not metaphorically. I mean, the forest itself spoke. Each syllable sounded like bark snapping, like leaves rustling against skin. It asked a single question: what do you need most? I didn't answer, but the mirror didn't need me to. Images spilled across the glass. My childhood home, the moment my mother died, my failed relationships, all of it, scenes I'd buried, playing back in perfect detail, and then rewritten in each memory. I made the right choice, said the right words, kept the right people. The forest wasn't tormenting me. It was offering. I dropped the mirror. It didn't shatter, just blinked and went dark. I fled the cellar, sealed the trapdoor, and piled everything I could on top of it. Then, I made a mistake. I opened the front door, and Gavril was standing there, except it wasn't Gavril. His face was off, just enough to notice, like someone had drawn it from memory, the eyes too symmetrical, the smile slightly too wide. He greeted me casually, as if we'd planned this visit. He held a bottle of tuica and said, "You've seen it now, haven't you?" I didn't answer, just motioned him in. I needed to know if this was really him, or just another echo, so I asked him something only the real Gavril would know. "What did you say the first night I arrived?" When I asked about Sylvan, he blinked for just a moment too long. Then he answered, almost perfectly, except he got one word wrong. He said welcomed when it should have been warned, and then he smiled, a slow, splitting smile, and stepped backward into the fog. That's when I saw the second Gavril, the real one, at least. I hope. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, eyes wide, coat soaked in rain, and he was screaming, but I couldn't hear the words. The fog swallowed him, and the copy vanished. Back inside, I did the only thing I hadn't tried. I went through Sylvan's journals, page by page, desperate for anything I'd missed, and buried in the spine of the final volume was a thin scrap of paper, a map, drawn by hand, showing a path through the forest, marked with strange symbols. At the end, a shape, like an eye, with lines radiating outward. Next to it, a note in Sylvan's handwriting. It sees through you, only if you see through yourself. Cryptic nonsense, or a key, either way. I knew I'd have to go back. I waited until morning, not because I thought it would be safer, but because I wanted to see the sky one last time. The map Sylvan left was barely legible, the paper cracked with every fold, but I followed it, not by logic, but by feel. The forest, it wanted me to follow. Each step deeper, the light changed, not dimmer, but wrong. The sun filtered through the branches like candlelight behind flesh. It made shadows that moved on their own. I passed the fallen oak, the tree with hollowed bark. It wept a dark sap that smelled like rusted metal. I passed the bent clearing, where the ground dipped in a perfect spiral, and I passed the place where my voice echoed back before I spoke. The map led me to a place no longer marked by trees, but by stone monoliths, tall and narrow, each carved with faces, some smiling, some screaming, some shaped exactly like mine. In the center stood a pillar covered in moss and claw marks. I remembered it from the mirror. This was the eye. Not a literal one, but a gate. The forest didn't want to trap me. It wanted to be me. A voice emerged from the trees, but it wasn't calling. It was pleading. My mother's voice, broken, gasping, begging me to come home. Then my uncle's voice, then Gavril's, then my own, layered, like the forest was sifting through every version of me, trying to build something. And then, I saw it, the forest's true form. Not a beast, not a ghost, but a presence, like a veil pulled back, showing the truth beneath the bark and stone. A figure stood before me, tall, antlered, faceless, its shape constantly shifting between silhouettes I recognized. Myself at 5 years old, myself on my worst day, myself if I'd never left the village. It didn't speak, it didn't need to. I understood. It wanted permission, not to take, but to inhabit. It would erase my mistakes, fulfill my wants, mend my past. All it asked for was my story, myself. But the moment I accepted, I wouldn't be anymore. Only the forest, wearing me. I stepped forward, the air shimmered. The forest leaned in, branches curling like fingers. And I whispered, "No." Everything stopped. No wind, no breath, no sound. The presence recoiled, not in anger, but in grief. It had not been hunting me, it had been hoping. And now it faded. The light returned, the trees uncurled, and the pillar crumbled. When I awoke, I was back in the cabin, the cellar sealed, the journals gone. The phone rang once, then died. Outside, the fog had lifted. I packed my things, left the key on the table, and walked down the path. Past the forest, through the village, where no one waited. I haven't spoken of it until now, because I still don't know what returned from that place. But sometimes, when I look into the mirror, I see someone looking back. What would you have done if the forest started mimicking your voice, your memories? If this AI-narrated horror gave you chills, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell.